I've been thinking about I've been thinking about mimics a lot. That's not true. I've been thinking about old school D&D, old school RPGs. There we go. And then I've been thinking about Baldur's Gate 3, which is coming out. And because of my obsession with mimics, I had an idea for a game that I wanted to run. Let's actually start building them, and then we'll get into that a little bit more. Yeah. Let's talk about mimics. What I've specifically been thinking about is how art is represented in role-playing games in regards to like how the monsters have changed. If you look at the original mimic from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, there has always been a intelligent mimic, which I don't really like the use of that, but we'll just say the friendly mimic. And then there has also always been the killer mimic. The two have always existed, but the fact remains is that they still decided to display the mimic as basically just this honestly silly looking little box with an arm coming out of it to punch an adventurer. This is such a tame portrayal of this creature compared to a lot of the art and a lot of the fan art and a lot of the depictions that we're seeing of it over the years. And obviously, of course, the mimic can be anything. It doesn't have to be a chest. We've seen some pretty wild examples of how far a game master will go to terrorize their players. What I'm more interested in is how in the original game, with the depiction, right? The original sketch, that opened up a lot of leeway. Anybody who was jumping into D&D would look at that, read the description and go, I could use this for puzzles. I could use this for interesting interactions with the players, because the mimic wants something. It has a goal, it has a desire, there is an outcome it's trying to achieve. Now, if you're someone like me and you've only been playing D&D for the last 5 years or so, you've probably only ever seen the angry box of teeth, right? That is what it looks like now. And if you go back to previous editions of the game, yes, there are some other portrayals where it isn't necessarily just a killer mimic, but for the most part, it's only shown now as this murder monster that's trying to eat you. And I have a feeling that some of the people that I'm playing with at the moment are under the same impression of mimics. They don't know the full backstory as I have recently learned. And so I want to make two versions of a mimic. I want to make the murder box with lots of teeth that we all know today, but I also want to do my own take on the classic mimic, if you will, from the original artwork. And I want to make the two of them very distinct from one another. One using just like really simple hobby and craft supplies, with the other one being sculpted in green stuff and done a lot more in my usual style that you see here on the channel. So at the end of it, I'll have two very unique looking minis that I can use in encounters. If I have players that try to play things out a little bit more diplomatically, if they try to maybe like reason with the creature, I can pull out the old school style mimic and I've got a really interesting piece to put on the table. And if I have a bunch of murder hobos that just want to attack it, then sure, the angry box of teeth can come out to play. You know, if you were to go back and do a super cut of all my videos, I can guarantee the most used item would probably be foil. To make the base of our chest, to make the base of our box, you could use foam if you've got it, XPS foam or whatever else. You could cut some strips of cardboard until you get the size that you're after. I am going to use foil. I use foil for so many of my builds. It is cheap. You've already got it in your kitchen and you can shape it into whatever form or armature that you need for whatever you're building right now. Also, we're gonna settle this once and for all in the comments. Aluminum or aluminium? Which one do you say? And if you're a real freak, let me know if you just say tin foil instead. So we're gonna take a sheet, a small piece of foil, and we are going to fold it over on itself. Using a flat surface, we're gonna get it 90% of the way there. To do the bottom half of our chest. Now, you can use a spoon or whatever other metal sculpting tool that you have to tap it into the shape that you're after. And if you really want to smooth it out, you can use the edge of your spoon to really get it down to the shape that you need. Now, I'm making the top and bottom of my chest as two separate pieces. And the reason for that is I want to be able to put some wooden planks over the two of them with ease, and then I can just glue the top to the bottom afterwards. This also gives you the option to hinge the top if you want to, right? So if you make the two parts separately and you decide you actually just want the box to be open and you might sculpt in some details or something in there, you can totally do that. I'm just gonna have mine stay shut because I want it to look like the art from the original AD&D monster manual. You're gonna take some coffee stir sticks. I always take mine and pretty much immediately split them down into these sort of misshapen matchsticks. This is a little bit closer to a more scale plank size for me for D&D. And so you're gonna take your little matchstick planks and you're gonna glue them around your base. I would recommend starting with the smaller edge first and then going around the wider edge on both sides. This way you have a lip that we can more easily hide in the next step. To do the metal accents on our chest, to do the metal banding that usually wraps around the surfaces and the edges, I wanted this first one, the sort of old school mimic, to be made using, I guess, what you could consider to be sort of like old school supplies. I wanted it to be done with craft supplies, things that people might already have at home that they could easily grab. And so rather than jumping to green stuff or some other type of epoxy clay, I'm gonna try using some sturdy paper. Just a scrap piece of construction paper. We're gonna cut this down into strips that are about the same width of the wood plank, and then we're going to super glue that around the box, trying to recreate the banding effect that you would see on a chest. So in the end, I decided to keep things pretty simple for the hinges and the lock on our little chest. They're both just made out of a thicker paperboard, and just by cutting out some small rectangles, I was able to very quickly put together a pair of hinges and then poke some holes into it using a sculpting tool. You could just use a sharpened pencil or a pen. And then by layering two rectangles on top of one another, I made our little lock, and same thing, just started poking into it using a sharp tool, just to give it the impression that there's a keyhole, which we can fix up with some paint later on. Now, to have our arm that's gonna be sort of growing out of the side of our chest, I did have a good idea where I won't have to use any clay. I'm gonna use some more foil to create an armature, to create like sort of the base of the arm coming out the side. And I'm gonna cover that in hot glue to give us that sort of more organic, viscous-y type texture that you may envision when you think of mimics and other creatures of the light. So for painting, I wanted to try to do like an old hammer style, basically. I'll put up a picture on screen somewhere, but in second edition, D&D mimics have this like really bright, vibrant color scheme. And so I'm gonna do a vibrant bright red on the wood of the chest, just yellow for the metal banding. The arm is gonna be pink. There's gonna be very minimal highlights or weathering, if any at all. And then the base is gonna be that like classic old hammer bright green. I know that the two exist in different spheres, but I really like this idea of like this old school revival sort of style for this mimic. And it's very different from anything else that I do. So I thought it'd be fun to sort of push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit on this. Hello. So today I'm gonna set myself a completely unrealistic goal and try to get the second mimic fully sculpted up by hand, maybe even ready for painting if we can swing it. To get started, I wanna set myself some parameters for how big I'm gonna go, and that starts off with picking out a base. Now, since we did a square base for our old school mimic, I think we're gonna do a circular base for our new one. I'm gonna take some paper, like some paper card, and cut out strips of it into individual little bricks and just super glue those down onto the base. And then I'll actually rip off the first layer of the paper so it has a nice sort of like rough stone texture. Most of this will be covered up by the mimic itself, but it's just to sort of like start building up those layers that we see a lot more now and those details that we have in modern day minis. And then the last step will be just to run some thin super glue in between the bricks, sprinkle some baking soda over those areas so we've just got like a nice gritty grout or like mortar texture in between the bricks. And then once I've got my little base set up, I can start sculpting my mimic on top of it. We're gonna try to multitask. You know how it goes. You know how every sculpt, every project that I do starts. We get some more foil. We make the shape of the base that we're after. This time around, we're going to use some green stuff to wrap around the outside of the foil and make the first layer of our box to make our wood planks. Using my sculpting tools, I'm gonna carve in some details, maybe a little bit of wood grain, just to make those individual planks inside the first layer of the green stuff. Be sure to add in any extra details that you want to at this stage, any cracks, any breaks in the wood. This is just gonna be for the bottom half of the box. Now with any leftover green stuff you have, you're gonna make a long boy snake and curve it into a shape that you're happy with. I'm just skipping the armature step for this. I've done this before to make tentacles for my Hastur in a previous video. So I know that you can just form the green stuff into a shape that you're kind of happy with for the tongue, prop it up on a tool or something, and you should be all sweet, good to go. And now I am just spending the pretty much next 30 minutes or so just rolling out a bunch of little pointy teeth. We want to pre-form the teeth now. Put any curves or any detail you want into them. That way, when we add a new layer of clay around the edge of the chest, that's gonna be sort of like the gums of the mimic, and we can take our hardened teeth and push those in so we get a nice, like just full mouth of teeth for the bottom jaw. I'm gonna give mine an underbite, sort of like sticking out further. And then once we've got the bottom half set up, we can move on to working on the top half of our box. So one thing I might have messed up just a little bit on my order of operations is, of course, the mimic needs to have a bunch of eyes in it. That's another interpretation that we see quite often on the sort of like newer illustrations of mimics. I'm using my go-to bag of little beads as the eyes, and I'm pushing them in between where the planks of the chest are. And this kind of gives it to say natural wouldn't be right, but it does. It gives us this like natural sort of look of like the eyes poking through these individual planks, like as if they're almost supposed to be there. I really like this effect. I think it looks quite cool. It's a part of the new design that I'm a really big fan of. But because I had to frantically put all these finishing details on, once I had the eyes pushed into place, I then very quickly went back and added the banding to the bottom and the top. And just for fun, I added a little bit more of like a gooey, fleshy bit on the back of our mimic, which I then pushed another eye into. Look at this toothy boy so far. So up to this point, I have kept the top and bottom separate from one another. I think this is gonna make my life a lot easier now when I move into painting. I also wanted to point this out because as an option, if you were gonna try to sculpt your own mimic in this style, if you keep the top and the bottom separate, that gives you a fun mechanic that you can use in your games. If somebody is devoured, if the mimic is able to actually like eat one of your players, you can leave the top open, place their mini on it. In fact, hold on. Oh no, I broke one of the teeth, which is fine, we can super glue it. But you can take a mini and actually like sit it inside of the mimic. And so now when you're playing, you can actually have a representation of the character being devoured by the mimic. This is just one of those fun little bonuses that I like to do when I make a mini, when I think about like how people play the game and what makes games fun to participate in. At the end of the day, we're basically playing with toys, and I want my action figures to have as many features as possible. Now for our new school mimic, I'm not reinventing the wheel. The tongue and gums are gonna be somewhere in between like a purpley, bluish, pink sort of color. The eyes are gonna be yellow to contrast quite nicely, and then of course the wood and the metal banding are just gonna be painted your sort of standard brown and gray. I did take some time to do like a little pin wash in between all the little cracks that I added into the individual planks of wood, all that good texture, just to sort of like accent that a bit more. I think we find now where we're currently at with a lot of like RPGs and a lot of minis, people tend to go for like sort of like darker, grimier paint schemes. We're able to get a lot more detail into minis now than we were in previous years. So of course you get to play around a lot more with highlights and washes. We've got more artistic representations of how we paint minis and doing dramatic things with lighting. And so I think these are all things that have sort of contributed to like how we view creatures and monsters in design for games and how that's changed over the years. I think it very much is a back and forth between what people in the community do and then what the writers and developers at these companies see, and how we influence each other back and forth. And I definitely think that if I do this style of video again, if I do sort of like a then and now comparison, I think next time I'll have a look at what's going on in the community around me at the time and maybe apply some of those paint techniques to the new version of the monster that I make. So there you have it, two very distinct takes on the Mimic. Easily one of the most iconic creatures to ever come across the pages of Dungeons and Dragons. This was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed pushing myself a little bit out of my comfort zone with the old school revival style of Mimic. I don't 100% love how it turned out in the end, but it was also the first time I ever tried to paint something in that style. So if you've got any recommendations, if you've got any videos you'd like me to check out, please let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, if you enjoyed this look into the sort of original version of a creature versus the modern day interpretation of it, I am tentatively calling this D&D Then versus Now. Maybe I'll call it RPGs Then versus Now, I'm not sure. But let me know if you enjoyed it and if there's a monster you'd like me to take a look at in the future, because I would really like to try this again. Finally, as always, an incredible thank you to my lovely patrons. With their support, I was able to buy myself some hobby paints this month, which have been an absolute dream to paint with, and I'm very excited to finish up some other stuff I have sitting on the table. By now, you all know the drill. If you liked the video, there's a button for that. If you'd like to see more of what I do, there's also a button for that. You can support me in lots of ways. Besides subscribing and signing up for my Patreon, I now have some merch available in my store. Anything you need to know is in the links below. Thank you very much for hanging out with me today. I will see you in the next one. Bye! Brightness is very high. That's the thing you messed up a little bit. Go even lower. Let's go crazy. Whoa, too dark.